News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a very good morning to you. This is Newsline, live from the News First studios in Dawson Street in Colombo and broadcasting on TV1, that wonderful channel from the Capital Maharaja Group. And joining us this morning on Newsline is Ms. Ambika Satkunanathan from the Human Rights Commission. A very good morning to you, madam, and welcome to Newsline.
Very good morning, Faraz. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. I would like to ask you, why is it now? You know, we do have a new government elected on this promise of good governance and openness and inclusivity and accountability, level playing field, and all those wonderful things that they keep telling us. Wonderful. But tell me why there are still concerns on human rights issues there. What's going on? Why?
Okay. I think firstly, it is important to remember that there probably isn't a country, even a single country in the world, where there are no human rights violations or problems. So in that sense, Sri Lanka is not unique.
Right.
And yes, the government has changed, and but of course that doesn't mean that overnight you're going to see change across the board. But of course here what we do have now is that we have freedom of expression, and people are able to protest, you're able to critique, but at the same time the systems, the processes have not changed, and also the mindset of people has not changed. So in Sri Lanka, for instance, we have a number of great laws, but implementation tends to be the problem. So hence, it is not surprising that we still have to deal with human rights violations.
Is it also that because of this new reintroduced freedom of speech and so on, we've had it, but we lost it along the way for a little bit, and so more or less it's here again, as you say. Is it that now more people feel more comfortable in making a complaint, and therefore, in a way, it's sort of almost artificially, but it's not really artificial, but in a way, the level of complaints and reporting has increased because people are less scared now?
Yes.
Or not scared at all, even.
Exactly. I mean, that is a perennial question that we have faced, particularly, for instance, where issues such as, even violence against women or abuse of children, torture is concerned. When people feel freer, when they feel they can express without reprisals, when they feel there are people to listen to them, and that there are mechanisms or institutions to which they can complain in the hope of obtaining redress, then of course you are going to see increased complaints, as we do see in terms of violence against women, against, for instance, child abuse.
And I'm going to come back to violence against women because that's a very important topic. But I also want to ask you this. The people of the former conflict areas, the North-Northeast, they voted in unheard of numbers. The voter turnout was so high at January 2015. And they obviously had, apart from their legitimate expectations as citizens of this country, they also had legitimate expectation that their suffering for about 30 plus years would be considerably eased. But it doesn't seem to be going that way, or does it to you?
Well, the people in the conflict-affected areas in the north and the east still face a number of problems, and this, once again, as a post-war country, it is not unique, and you need to bring in place, policies. You need to dedicate resources to actually address them. So, for instance, livelihood issues are a big problem in the conflict-affected areas. There are a large number of women-headed households. The majority of women-headed households happen to be in these areas, and also when women are economically disempowered, they are also open to exploitation. Debt happens to be another big problem that people in the north and the east face.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is. And of course, there are still those who continue to live in what are called welfare centers. And there are issues related to, even permanent housing.
Welfare centers, is it a nicer word than camps?
Well, I don't know whether it's a nicer word, but it also means that people who have been displaced from their homes are now living in some sort of a temporary shelter.
Right.
But of course, that in time also becomes permanent because some of these people have been there for, many, many years.
In Putlam, in that area, those people
Putlam,
live
but
there
also
for
there
like
are a
25
few.
years.
Yes, and also there are a few in the north as well who have been there for about 20 years.
Oh, really? So that it's not just from the end of the war, not those internally displaced people.
No, these would be people from prior to that, and many
Right.
of these people are also there because some of them are landless. In other cases, the lands have not been returned. So the communities in the north and the east face a myriad of problems. So you do need, creative, holistic approach that also requires you to dedicate a lot of resources towards it.
We had Defense Secretary Heti Arachi on this program about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he told us that considerable gains are being made in terms of returning lands back to their owners. And there are, along with that program, there are various attendant difficulties. But nevertheless, they're making progress. Would you agree with that?
Land has been released.
Right.
Yes, land definitely has been released. But of course, even where the released land is concerned, people need support. For instance, the land is overgrown. They may not have the resources to clear the land, to survey the land again, and to put up temporary shelters before they, reconstruct their houses. So even when lands are released, which is a very positive thing, people do need continuous support to rebuild their lives.
Then what about the resources? We got the resources to do that?
Well, I think it's not a question of do we have the resources, but we do need to allocate the resources.
We need to get it.
We definitely do.
Okay. But, I went there some months ago, and one can't help but notice the almost sense of hopelessness. And, these people they're still suffering. And I know that you go into Kilinochchi and it's looking like a new town. Well, it is a new town. It's been rebuilt and all that. But what about these other people? There's so many people still without homes, and so one wonders whether they have any hope left.
Well, yes. I mean, there are those who might not have permanent homes, people who are still in the welfare camps, women-headed households who find it very difficult to make ends meet, to even send their children to home. People like that would feel hopeless. And particularly also, we must not forget that many of them have been displaced multiple times. They suffer a lot of psychological trauma. So we also need to address that.
Is there a lot of counseling programs going on there?
I'm afraid we don't have adequate counseling programs.
Right.
That is also something which we do need to, step up on.
And but human rights is issues connected with human rights is way up there. Sort of, I don't know if it's the main thing, but there's that concern. And then we have reports that President Sirisena called President-elect Trump and sort of wanted something or other in connection with this to be dropped. What is that all about?
I really cannot comment, Faraz, because we don't know whether we've read newspaper reports, but really I cannot comment because I don't know what the content of the phone call was.
Yeah.
So I'm really not placed to comment on
yes,
that.
that would be entering the realms of speculation
Exactly.
if we were to do that.
Exactly.
We'll leave speculation alone then. But what is the, there's loads of protests going on. People are protesting about almost everything. Water, transport, education. Some people are complaining that the protesters, now that they can freely exercise their right to protest, peaceful, are causing great inconvenience to others, and so these others who are inconvenienced are not very happy about these protests and say, well, it would be better without protests. So why this growing concern? It appears that way because there's protests for almost everything. Yesterday there was one in the port in Hambantota. 483 people are complaining that they may lose their job because this thing's being given, or they're entering into a PPP with the Chinese. So what does that indicate? Is it...
Well, protests indicate that there is freedom of expression, and protesting is also, part of democracy. And I think what we tend to forget is democracy is not always easy. It is not always convenient.
Yeah.
But that, once again, the inconvenience perhaps, and to deal with complexity and the shades of grey is the price that you have to pay, where you have, in order to create a society that is based on rule of law, where there is protection of human rights.
But these protesters, those students, for example, they got beaten up right in the heart of Colombo. That can't be...
Of course, excessive use of force is clearly...
just not on, is it?
That is, yes, clearly not on.
And because we are a cricket-loving country, perhaps if you said that it's not cricket, people will understand that.
I don't think I quite understand your
comment. It's not normal, is it? You get beaten up.
Right.
You're protesting, and you get water cannon, tear gassed, and perhaps the defence budget has got. I'd love to know how much a tear gas they buy.
But also, I think maybe we also need to, learn the art of peaceful protest, and also find creative ways of expressing dissent. But expression of dissent is never a bad thing.
And this other issue here, the violence against women. How's that doing in Sri Lanka? Is it abating? Is it very much of concern?
Well, in Sri Lanka, we, one thing I think that we're not very good at is documentation. So, for instance, we don't have very good statistics on, the number of women who have been, suffering from violence.
Yeah.
But that said, there are lots of organizations that work on these issues, and what we find is that violence is indeed a problem, particularly violence within the family, domestic violence.
Right.
And often, women don't report this for many reasons. It's because they may not be economically independent, so they cannot leave, a marriage or the family. There is stigma in accepting that you have been subjected to violence, and also they may feel that they have nowhere to go to complain, to obtain redress.
Isn't that awful to be in that position? That
of course
you're getting beaten up or
Indeed.
abused, and then you want to go, you want to run away.
Indeed.
But there's nowhere to run to.
Exactly. And I think when we also speak of violence against women, we must look at the root causes, because often it is said, it's due to alcohol, it's due to poverty, which is not really correct. Those are factors that might exacerbate violence, but the reason for violence is patriarchy. It's the fact that women are not perceived as equal, and women are subjected to discrimination. And also there is a sense of impunity that if you perpetrate violence against a woman, you're not going to be held accountable. You can get away scot-free. So the sense of impunity, therefore, creates space for violence to be perpetrated.
Do you think we need a few more Jayalalitha type women in Parliament, because it's very underrepresented right now?
Women's representation in Parliament and in other decision-making bodies, and also women's political participation, is dismally low in Sri Lanka. Particularly when you compare Sri Lanka to even other South Asian countries, we are dismally low. And I think that too, once again, is also about inequality, because families most often will not want women to go into politics.
Yeah.
The political parties themselves might not be democratic, so they do not give nomination to a woman. They might prefer to give it to a man, thinking the woman is not a winnable candidate.
Yeah.
There is violence, which then, prevents women. They might be afraid to enter politics because of that, reluctant. And also now campaigning is a very resource-intensive activity, so women may not have access to the amount of financial resources needed.
And what steps? What are you all doing? What's the main theme of trying to address this problem?
Well, addressing it, I think that the Human Rights Commission is just one part of a system that is required to address generally human rights violations. And where the Commission is concerned, of course, we are mandated to accept complaints
Right.
about violations of fundamental rights.
Yeah.
And we can inquire, investigate,
Yeah.
and then give recommendations to the government. We can advise the government on law reform, and we can also engage in public education, all of which we are doing. But I would also like to talk about this year's Human Rights Day theme, which I
Yes.
think is very important.
Yes, it's the
Which-
10th of December. isn't
10th
it?
of December, and the theme is Stand Up for Someone's Right.
Right.
So it's about to say, the whole point of that is to say, if you want your own rights to be protected, then it's also important to stand up for someone else's right, because it's all connected. And you need to be a law-obeying citizen who, respects rule of law in order for a society that respects the rule of law to exist. So that is the theme, and I think it's also about creating a sense of civic responsibility in people, towards the community, towards the country, and to say, it's important to protect everyone's rights. Your right is also dependent on that.
Yes, and are there enough centres, safe houses and so on? And is there money for all this?
Where violence against women are concerned, actually that is a severe lacuna. We do not have enough safe houses for women, and women who leave violent situations often,
How
find
do you
it...
get this funding? Who funds what?
Oh, this is, you mean in terms of the commission?
Yeah,
Well, the Human Rights Commission, where, we get funding from the state through the Consolidated Fund.
right.
Yes.
But is that enough? No.
Well, I mean, resources are concerned, I must be honest and say,
Is enough?
we are okay in a sense, but for us the main problem actually is that when we make recommendations in cases that they're not always followed. So for the Human Rights Commission to be effective, we need other state actors and entities to respect our mandate and our recommendations and implement them.
The corporate sector is always hit for taxes and this, that and the other. Super gains taxes and all that. So what about, do you all have a program where you engage the corporate sector to fund such activities, which is necessary as part of a wider CSR?
Well, actually, that's a great question, and what my answer to that would be, it would be very good if, the corporate sector, and particularly the media and organizations such as yours, were to provide support, particularly to help the Commission to take the message out.
Right. Of course, you are aware that we do something perhaps as important, but certainly invaluable resource in this GovMad program.
Yes, I do.
And we are now in our GovMad. It's not a program anymore. It's a movement. There's all these people running around the country in their unmistakable black and yellow T-shirts, and I went and watched some of these things.
Right.
And the people were happy. They were happy because they know these guys, when they come there, they're going to finish whatever it is that they've started. So, bridges, walkways,
Yes, I've
RO
seen it on
plants
TV.
and all that.
Yes.
So, important movement. But can't you get others, which is, this network is well known to be able to, because we've got the experience, disaster relief measures and all that, we're off like that. And this movement is growing every day. But how likely and how possible is it to start such a movement, perhaps not on the same scale, to address this very major concern, which is this violence against women? Because it must be so awful.
I think particularly for the corporate sector, it's important to also understand that they have a stake in addressing it because it also impacts their bottom line. So
Yeah.
for instance, when you have women who might be subjected to violence, then their productivity is going to be low. They might take more leave. So, research has proven that it does affect the bottom line adversely. So in that sense, I think it is very important for the corporate sector to step up to bring measures both within the institution, because for instance, you might have issues like sexual harassment within the institutions. There might be women staff members who need additional support to be economically productive, etc. So within the organization itself, I think it's very important for the corporate sector to take measures which will, positively impact the women and society, but also the company.
And our textile industry is probably one of the larger employers of where women work, and so it's a big sector, and in terms of foreign exchange,
Yes.
A big spinner.
Yes.
So perhaps those companies where they're directly employing large amounts of ladies who, and perhaps that's a good start.
That is, yeah. I mean, I was at an event last evening where we did have, we talked about this issue exactly, about preventing, gender-based violence within the workplace, and there were people from the apparel sectors, a couple of companies that talked about the measures that they have taken. For instance, they provide transport to these women because, of the working hours. For women who come from out of Colombo or from out of the cities where they have the factories, they actually have living spaces or hostels for them, and they have in-house counselors. So they talked about some of the measures, and I think this is something that all companies do need to take. But now I suppose it's started, but we need much, much more of it.
And are there any particular hotspots of abuse or anything? Is it more in one region or one area? Or not?
The reason that it's hard to say that for us is also because we don't have enough data. We don't track this. We don't have, national level data on this. What we have are research studies done by various individuals or institutions. That is not a national study per se. So that's hard. But having said that, for instance, it is quite normal, in a conflict-affected country for violence to be high, and particularly in the conflict-affected areas. And that through, from civil society organizations working in those areas, you do get information that they find that there is an increased number of violence within the home, plus also of child abuse, etc.
And overall, are you happy? Are you rather more encouraged now than you were maybe 5 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, from the Commission's perspective, and this is something that we've even said in one of our reports, is that what we are glad about is the fact that there is space to speak of these issues, that we can function independently. So in that sense, yes, I would say we are hopeful and we are determined. Yes.
What about what's happening in Geneva now? This UN resolutions and all that. It doesn't seem to be so much in the news. Maybe it's been overtaken by the protests and the bond and constitutional reform and all these people who have been making their way in and out of remand and court and then re-remanded and re-indicted, and all sorts of jolly things are happening. And we have the dancing Sir IGP and all that, and that seems to have, that's the news nowadays.
Right.
So
I mean, I can't say why it is not in the news. I think you being part of the
News,
media,
we
news
know that.
industry, perhaps
But
you
is
could
it-
answer
is-
that question better
yes,
than I.
but what's actually happening? What in terms of
I, to be totally honest, right now, what is happening, I could not say in terms of the resolution, because the Human Rights Council meets in March, and I
Right.
suppose, as a commission, we're not involved in that, but perhaps someone from a civil society organization or the state would be better placed to answer that.
Right. So, but you are not duly concerned that this is some outpost almost forgotten in the world where human rights abuses is rampant?
In Sri Lanka,
It's not, right?
that we're an outpost where human rights abuses are rampant and everyone's forgotten about us? No, I don't think
No.
so.
Wonderful. So that's good, isn't it? Because so that it's being addressed and so on. Are they well paid?
Who?
The human rights people. Do they have enough money to carry on?
Well, I think the Commission has adequate funds.
Oh, good.
And and I think, when you're a functioning Commission, then if you need funds, I think there's
The
always...
finance ministry hasn't forgotten you, that's what I mean.
No, I don't think we have been forgotten.
Wonderful. I think, and that wraps up Newsline this morning. Ambika Satyanarayana, thank you very much for being on Newsline.
Thank you,
we look
Faraz.
forward to, and I think that you're appearing on Pathikada.
Well, I've been asked, yes.
On Monday. Hopefully, Mr. Jayasekara will find his way. On Monday, he's having a few days off, but he'll be there on Monday morning to ask you about human rights in Sinhalese. Thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you, Faraz.
And that's it from Newsline this morning. We'll see you same time, same place tomorrow morning. Take care and God bless.